Despite the declared end of the Cold War, there remains one region of the world where rivalry between the superpowers is as fervent as ever. When the Soviet army left Afghanistan last year, few expected the regime of the Soviet-appointed friend and foe alike still holds out in the heavily fortified presidential palace in Kabul. The Soviet military are determined to keep him there. The United States is equally committed to removing him. Millions of dollars worth of military support still flows to the Mujahedeen, even though their holy war against Najib's regime is in complete disarray. The Mujahedeen's most powerful military leader, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, has left the alliance of tribal factions and has condemned it as a failure. For Newsnight, the BBC's Asia correspondent, Brian Barron, has returned to Afghanistan for the first time since the Soviet withdrawal, and he now assesses the prospects of continued survival for President Najibullah.
In a valley of rustic charm, another day of death begins in Afghanistan. This is a warrior nation already fragmented. For a year, they've been groping for peace, a concept unknown to a generation of Afghans. Here, in the Pagman Valley, the Kabul army consolidates its grip on positions recently captured from the Mujahedeen. It would take a Machiavelli to cling to power here. Kabul has one, headhunted by the Kremlin. President Najibullah, age 43, a fleshy graduate of medical college, the secret police command, and many assassination attempts. This March, there was a coup attempt against you. Your own defense minister tried to kill you here. How secure do you feel?
How do you find my nature now?
You're very confident today, Mr. President, but what about behind the scenes in terms of the political temperature in this capital? How confident are you?
با اجرای از این کودتا تمام راه‌ها باز شد، موانع برداشته شد، سنگ‌اندازی ها جلوش گرفته شد و شما می‌بینید که ما با چی آهنگ سریع اقدامات اجتماعی و سیاسی خویش سازمان میدیم.
It's 17 months since the Soviet army left Kabul after a military failure as comprehensive as the Americans in Vietnam. Some scars remain unhealed. Over 300 Soviets are still prisoners of war held by the Mujahedeen. Returning to Kabul today strikes eerily familiar chords. Aeroflot cargo planes still drop flares to confuse Mujahedeen Stinger missiles. This daily airlift of 20 or more flights, each carrying 40 tons of armaments and essentials, keeps Najibullah's war machine going. Few in the West 18 months ago could have imagined that Kabul today in 1990 could be thriving under the same totalitarian masters. Before the Soviets pulled out, so did all Western embassies. Kabul was seen as another would-be Saigon, right to be conquered. That's one of the West's bigger intelligence blunders. Since then, the British embassy, from which our colonial forebears attempted to impose order on Kabul, has stood empty. But the Western boycott of Najibullah is cracking. The French have slipped back. The rest of Europe is likely to follow. But there's no immunity, diplomatic or otherwise, from the Mujahedeen cluster rockets that have killed 200 in Kabul recently. It's a terror weapon designed to lower morale. In terms of civilians, it produces results. On one bad day, we heard 40 rockets hitting Kabul. Najibullah can't do much about the rockets, which have forced the closure of Kabul University, where he became a doctor in the late 60s. In that turbulent era, before Afghanistan's king was exiled, Najibullah was a pro-Marxist student leader. Today in Kabul, many who once preached modernism eagerly show newfound piety. They're aware that the Mujahedeen Jihad, the holy war, has lost much of its fervour since Moscow's infidels withdrew. Even Najibullah has talked of growing a beard like a mullah.
جامعه افغانستان اجازه میده خصوصیات، عنعنات، تاریخ، نقش مذهب در افغانستان، عنعنات و رواجها در اینجا، ایدئولوژی مارکسیستی نمیتونه مورد قبول مردم افغانستان باشه.
So Kabul's ruling Communist Party is being renamed. Najibullah called this supreme tribal gathering to approve cosmetic change with an Islamic tinge. Whoever rules this capital inherits a throne of blood. Of Najibullah's 20th century predecessors, 5 were murdered, 1 executed, 3 exiled. Now he promises social democracy. Could this seriously be democracy's birth pangs? The only Western correspondent in Kabul advocates caution.
You know, I was talking to the chief presidential spokesman the other day, and he was claiming that Afghanistan was moving towards a Western-style capitalist democracy. But it's far from it, because the party congress, the Loya Jirga, the Grand Tribal Assembly, which was convened to amend the constitution, before that central committee meetings, these are still held in a highly secretive manner. And whenever there are a large number of Mercedes-Benz limousines outside the foreign ministry building,
in the capital, after years of persecution, are a handful of aging royalists. They're brave, decent moderates who suddenly find themselves being wooed by Najibullah. He'd like a few in his tame cabinet as token proof of an end to the one-party state.
There is a discrepancy between what the government says and what the government does.
You mean it's cosmetic, all this talk about democracy?
That is what we want to see. You see, the future will tell us, you know.
But you're skeptical, Professor.
Wouldn't you be skeptical if you were in our position?
The big unknown is the reliability of the army commitment to Najibullah. These days, as a fighting force, it's holding its own against the Mujahedeen. Here at Pakman, the army claims to have occupied Mujahedeen positions which earlier defied the might of the Soviet military. It's wise not to linger here. By day, the Kabul army can bludgeon the Mujahedeen. Their roles are often reversed at night. The army is proud to have recaptured the ruins of one of the exiled king's pleasure palaces. It's now held by so-called government militia. In fact, they're Mujahedeen who switch sides. Najibullah is using his formidable skills at bartering and bribery, a time-honored war tactic in Afghanistan. For this Kabul army commander, his recent advance netted a horde of the rockets used to bombard the capital 12 miles away. Twice a day he calls up the nearest Mujahedeen commander, part of Najibullah's strategy of encouraging battlefield deals. Shrewd tactics, but the Kabul army itself appears deeply factionalized between pro-Marxist and the less ideological. For 2 days in March, Najibullah holed up in his palace as rebel troops and airmen staged a coup attempt. His arch foe, the most fundamentalist Mujahedeen leader, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, backed the anti-Najibullah revolt. He reckons another is just a matter of time.
In the last 5 months, there were 3 big attempts. And 4 times Kabul regime has captured big number of army officers under the name of coup d'etat against regime. Now Kabul regime cannot rely on the army.
While the military and political deadlock persists, there are others trying to help Afghanistan despite the physical dangers. This is a United Nations expedition into what's called a zone of tranquility in central Afghanistan. The UN flag goes up over a town where Mujahedeen groups have squabbled for a year. There's no government or social services here. Nearby is the cultural heart of this country, the fabulous giant Buddhas of Bamiyan, which are now in peril.
There's bullet holes in them, the artifacts have been removed, the frescoes have been damaged, some of the caves around the Buddhas are being used as ammunition stores. There are Mujahedeen gun posts actually just above the head of the Buddhas. They've probably suffered more damage in the last 10 years than they have in the last 1,000.
Just as alarming is the erosion of hope among living Afghans. The sad ocean of humanity, totaling over 3 million, living as refugees just across the border in Pakistan. Here in Peshawar, their frustrations, however unfairly, are erratically focused on the West, especially international relief workers. Incited by a radical mullah, refugees destroyed this food depot run by an American relief agency. The exiled Mujahedeen government here in Peshawar is so discredited it can do little to counter the fundamentalists. Why do you think Western relief workers are being targeted?
There are a number of reasons, and they can vary from dismay or dissatisfaction with negotiations between the superpowers, between what improved relations between Western governments and the government of Afghanistan in Kabul, to almost ridiculous things like accusations that Christians are dishing out Bibles or somehow perverting Muslim women, which of course are absolute nonsense.
To assess the degree of anarchy in the vast tracts of Afghanistan under Mujahedeen control, we travelled through Paktia province. No refugees have returned to these bombed-out villages surrounded by uncharted minefields. For 10 years, this wonderfully fertile valley has lain empty. Now, in the midsummer heat, Afghan nomads are the only sign of life, camping out in the untilled fields, left to themselves both by the Mujahedeen and the Kabul regime. In much of Paktia, the Mujahedeen are confronting each other. We witness this midnight scene of guerrillas from the Afghan National Liberation Front, the ANLF, trying to salvage armaments from their weapons dump. It had been raided and then blown up by rival Mujahedeen. Several ANLF men had been taken away as prisoners.
درویش لارې مهمات په دې ورځو کې هم د شورا موږ سره هلته موجود وو چې دوی په دې باندې قبضه ولګوله او دوی په دې باندې تعرض وکړو چور چپاول یې وکړو دا ټول زموږ کوم مهمات مواد خوراکه اسلحه چې کوم په ډیپو کې موجود وه سره د خپلو زموږ محافظونو هغه هم ځان سره په شکل د بندیانو بوتلي اختلاف په دې زیات شو او دا عملونه چې په دې شکل دوی عملي اجرا کوي نو ټول مسلمانان دې نه متنفر کیږي حتی زموږ جهاد د داسې عملو په خاطر ډېر زیات ضعیف شو.
In retaliation, the ANLF are seizing supply lorries belonging to the rival Mujahedeen. That tactic pays off today, hence the smiles. For the Mujahedeen, no end is in sight to this long summer of discontent. Najibullah in Kabul is exploiting the divisions among them, using Soviet money and armaments to subvert the allegiance of those who are wavering. So there'll be no clean-cut end to this war, which began with so much honour invested as a jihad. Instead, Afghanistan's centuries-old pattern of warlordism, of individual strong men from valley to valley, is reasserting itself. It was less complicated for the Mujahedeen when the Soviets were here, when a man had to do what a man had to do and could rejoice in destroying a Soviet convoy. Today, the radicals complain of Western betrayal.
Before Russian withdrawal and the presence of Russian troops in Afghanistan, Mujahideen were called as heroes, freedom fighters. But just as after Russian withdrawal, they have changed their tune. Now they call them terrorists.
The Americans regard Hekmatyar as too dangerously fundamentalist to support, but they insist aid is reaching his rivals.
That American aid continues at the same levels as it has in the past, and it will continue in the future until there is a transfer of power from Najib to a broad-based, legitimate Afghan regime.
On a pass leading to Paktia province, the scrap metal merchants profit from the ceaseless flow of superpower arms. Yet Afghanistan was supposedly a model of how regional conflicts could be resolved. But Najibullah still survives, ever the consummate bluffer.
تا جایی که مربوط به تعقیب سیاست ما و صحیح تأثیر سیاست ما بوده، ما در این عرصه دستاوردهای زیادی داریم. مثلا 2/3 قماندان‌های داخل کشور با ما عملا نمی جنگه و بسیاری از قماندان‌ها تماس و مذاکره جریان داره.
As this is Afghanistan's fighting season, the gravediggers ply their trade in Kabul. With no agreement about who should occupy Kabul's throne of blood, the one constant on all sides is death. Moscow's men, especially the Soviet generals, are afraid to withdraw their patronage from Najibullah lest a hostile Islamic regime succeed. That could encourage the restive Muslims across the border in Soviet Central Asia.
Afghanistan revisited by Brian Barron. Now, turning to tomorrow morning's front pages, the Financial Times leads with Mr. Gorbachev re-elected as party leader. Victory over the hardliners for Gorbachev. The Telegraph, Gorbachev triumph. The Guardian, the Times says Gorbachev says no return to tanks and axes days in Eastern Europe. The paper leads with English soccer teams let back into Europe. The Independent leads with the expected postponement of the government's community care plans. The Sun has a story about Chris Patten, the Chancellor John Major, over cleaning up the environment. Well, that's all from Newsnight for tonight, but don't forget breakfast news at 6:30 in the morning, and join us again if you can at 10:30 tomorrow evening. Till then, from me and everyone on the programme, a very good night to you.